All right. So welcome everybody to today's episode where I have a very special guest, Caroline Weeks. Hello, Caroline.
Hello, Erin. It's so good to be here.
So Caroline and I were just reminiscing a little bit over how we first met, and we're kind of joking about our love story.
Yes.
So Caroline, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, I don't even remember. We were trying to get our stories straight just a couple seconds ago because it seems like yesterday that we were just eating at this really cool vegan restaurant in Philadelphia together during the Food and Nutrition Conference and Expo. But Erin and I have been Insta friends for many years. I have followed you for so many years before your Instagram blew up and before you became a big deal.
Hey,
I was one of your original followers. And I've just always respected you for how authentic you are and how thoughtful you are and how you approach research. And I just love that. You are such a unique voice in this oversaturated field of nutrition and health.
Oh my gosh, you're not supposed to be bragging about me. I'm supposed to be bragging about you in the intro.
Oh, thanks.
So Caroline is awesome. And like she just mentioned, we have been, not only just colleagues, but close friends for many years. And it was great to finally meet her at Fancy. And there is no better person to have on this podcast episode today than her. She is a true expert in her field. Caroline is a pediatric registered dietitian who has a very obvious passion for educating families on how to provide nourishing meals from the beginning of life. She is a postpartum nutrition and child feeding expert and has a particular interest in teaching the baby-led weaning approach to starting solids, which she's going to tell us all about because I am just as curious as those who are listening. I am definitely not informed on this topic. And in her full-time career, she is a clinical dietitian who works with families of children with chronic medical conditions such as gastrointestinal disorders and cystic fibrosis. Amazing, amazing stuff.
Thank you. Thanks.
And as if this is not enough, she has over 7 years of experience in professional nutrition writing for several publications, including USA Today and Eat This, Not That.
Yes.
So Caroline, thank you for the amazing work that you are continuing to do. And, today's episode I am excited for because there's so much that I can learn from you. And I hope the listeners can take away some really great stuff. So thank you for
doing so too. Yeah, let's dive in. Yeah,
okay.
So we are going to be talking about gut health as it relates to the very earliest years of life and within the infant stages. And obviously my niche on Instagram is teaching the baby-led approach to starting solids. I will kind of give a disclaimer and say that I'm of the philosophy that feeding is totally the parent's prerogative. And I most definitely support parents in whichever way they decide to start solids with their baby. So I might recommend purees to one family if that's what makes them comfortable. But on Instagram, I talk about baby-led weaning just because that is a passion of mine. So you had asked me what baby-led weaning was, because I think it's really, most people have never heard of it. And to be honest, when I was in practice in pediatrics for the beginning, I had never heard of it either. And that's because it has really only started to gain popularity within the United States within the last few years. It was originally most popular in the UK and in Europe. And the idea is that when baby shows signs of developmental readiness to begin solids, you skip over purees entirely and you offer table foods to begin with that are offered in a developmentally safe way that wouldn't cause a choking episode. So it might be kind of difficult for the reader to envision or visualize if they've never seen this before. But essentially what I'm doing, and I work with clients one-on-one in a coaching kind of type situation online virtually, where I will give baby a slice of avocado and a 6-month-old will be going to town on a slice of avocado and they're eating it. They might not even have teeth because teeth are not necessary to eat in the beginning. And it's just awesome. And there's been some scientific data and research published on this style of feeding. The idea is that baby-led approaches really honor the baby's internalized hunger and fullness cues. So if you think about starting with purees where, mom or dad is feeding the baby, potentially you could override those feeding cues if you're not feeding responsively or really paying attention to baby's fullness cues, because they have no control, right? They're completely out of control when they're being, I hate to say force fed, but sometimes if you see parents feed their baby, it looks like they're force feeding. And so there have been some linkages between baby-led weaning and, lesser incidence of obesity later in life, better weight management in the long term. And there has been some reports saying that potentially fewer picky eaters that grow up. So I think it's great, and I have had a lot of success with it. And so if anybody's interested, you should definitely, reach out to me on my site. I'm at TheClinicDietitian on Instagram, or do some of your own research for sure.
Yeah, and she's got some amazing infographics on her Instagram too, which even if you're not a mom with kids right now, I mean, pass the information on to people that are, or, start soaking in the information, because I know for sure I want to be a parent one day, and your information is, pun intended, very digestible. And
thank you.
If you haven't realized from her voice so far already, she's very easy to talk to, especially like I can picture you talking to a baby. It's like the most soothing voice ever. So,
aw, I get lots of practice.
You say that as if like you live with someone who's a little difficult or something.
Yeah, just lots of crying babies in clinic, probably.
I figured that's what you meant.
Yeah.
So today we're going to kind of chat about, this baby-led weaning and some feeding practices, particularly as they pertain to gut health. I love looking at the gut microbiome in the early stages of life. Again, that preventative mindset, it kind of makes me envious of the work that you do, because it's so cool that you're able to establish this groundwork from a very young age. And what you said to me, because I work with an older population, is what you just said. It sounded like intuitive eating for babies.
Totally. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
I was just like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. It's
the
like
light bulb went off.
Start them young, right? That's
right.
I love that.
And that's why I feel I have such a passion for peds, is I do get to, my small interventions are like just times 10, right? Because they're smaller bodies. So any little difference is going to make a larger impact, but also too, you get to really instill healthy habits from the get-go. And so much of pediatrics is behavioral and psychological, emotional. And so I get to work with parents and really kind of set their expectations in a proper place, because so much of parenthood, because there's no training manual, right, is like thinking that you've got to attain this like impossible goal that just isn't there. It doesn't exist. And so it's nice to kind of have people bring you down a little bit. And I think that's so important with food and nutrition, because there's so much information. There's so many question marks, even when it comes to babies. So yeah.
No, I love that. And one of the things I even had pulled from your website prior to this was your mention of like how food choices are rooted in family tradition and culture, and especially that eating for, well for one person can look very different than another person. I love this because, we really talk about there is no one size fits all. And so really you viewing it from a very holistic approach is awesome. It's just another reason why I love you. So.
Oh, thank you.
So as Caroline mentioned, she kind of highlighted that link between these early stage habits that we're developing and kind of later in life conditions. So we know that the gut microbiome is established at a very young age. And we actually used to believe that the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract, was actually sterile when the baby was in the uterus, but there's new research that shows that this is actually not the case, and that a fetus's GI tract is actually colonized by bacteria through the amniotic fluid swallowed by the mother. So pretty cool to think that, now we're even seeing this laying the groundwork for a healthy gut starting even earlier than we maybe have thought that it was.
Right.
And we're seeing that this is so important for just having this as a consideration, for knowing that at this early stage in life, we can have an impact of possibly preventing things like allergies, asthma, obesity, heart disease. Anything that's related to the gut microbiome, right? Because 70% of our immune system's located there, and any sort of disruption there we're seeing a whole cascade of health issues. So pretty cool stuff.
It really is. And so many environmental things impact at the start of life. So I don't know if you wanted to dive into this right now, Erin, but we had talked about difference between vaginal birth or cesarean birth and how those impacts the potential gut flora, skin to skin after baby's first been born, has been linked to improved diversity in the gut microbiome. So all of those environmental things are important as well.
That's awesome. And I think that skin to skin, people don't think, and this goes for anything you mentioned in the earlier part of the conversation too, the just emotional impact of, behavioral and emotional things, because those are, I think, underrated in terms of overall health in general. But let's come back to the C-section delivery versus vaginal, because this is a funny one, because on my intake form for my clients, because I specialize in gut health, and so I'll ask them, what method of birth were you born? And I'll have a check for C-section or vaginal. And then we'll get to the initial consultation. They're like, why are you asking me which way I was born? And, and honestly, not that it's really going to change a course of action as to how I treat a client, but it gives me information that is also supported by research showing that infants born via C-section have a gut microbiota composition similar to the skin of the mother, whereas those who are born vaginally have a gut microbiota that resemble their mother's vaginal microbiota. So the research has shown that people who are born via C-section tend to have more health issues, specifically gut issues later in life, as well as mental health, skin conditions, and so on. And so honestly, the reason I ask it on my form is I'm actually just trying to gather research on my own and see that link. Right. I have noticed a trend that is consistent with the research. So very interesting.
Wow. It's fascinating.
Not something you can really control, right? So
that's true.
A lot of advice there. I'm not an expert in that. So,
but the food is something the parents can control for sure. So there's hope.
That's very true. So now maybe we can kind of talk about formula or like artificial lactation. So human milk is, in my opinion, just like this magical thing that comes out of mothers.
Liquid gold.
Yeah, liquid gold. I'm going to sound probably kind of silly when I talk about some of this, because again, I'm not an expert when it comes to to anything related to what Caroline does. Human milk contains proteins, fats, carbohydrates, but it also contains immunoglobulins as well as endocannabinoids. And this one I think is so cool, the endocannabinoids.
I didn't even know that. That's so new to me. So I'm learning from you, Erin. You need to not cut yourself short.
I read a research article, I can tell you that.
Yeah,
so
that's fabulous.
So for those who don't know what an endocannabinoid is, I'm just going to kind of highlight it to something that's really popular. As a holistic cannabis practitioner, CBD is a phytocannabinoid. So I'm not going to go into this, but go listen to episode 3 to learn some more about the benefits of these phytocannabinoids, as well as the ones that are naturally produced in our body. But breast milk contains those, and that is so cool to me.
That is really cool. It also, which we were just talking about a few minutes ago, it also has oligosaccharides, breast milk does, which is a natural prebiotic, which I'm sure you've talked about in your podcast episodes several times already, but is kind of the food for the gut once it gets there. So I like to use the phrase, it seeds the gut, like you're giving the gut the food and you plant the probiotics in there, but then you got to feed them to grow them and to make them happy. So that's what one benefit of breast milk does. And actually, I will say a lot of formula companies, because if a parent is listening and they weren't able to breastfeed, no big deal. I am totally of the mindset that fed is best. And now there's been so many scientific advances with formula that they're actually trying to kind of in a lab recreate some of those things like the immunoglobulins. So I don't want to name any brands, but a lot of really cool research is being done that makes formula almost as good in almost every single way as the breast milk. So we've come a really long way.
Oh, that's awesome. I had no idea about that. So I had read a recent study reported that supplementation with pasteurized donor human milk was partially successful in promoting a microbial community similar to infants who are breastfed. But that's awesome. And I when I was doing the research, I thought in my head, there's got to be someone out there who's trying to mimic
Oh,
that.
for sure. Yeah. I think donor milk is tricky just because it's extremely expensive. And so that's the biggest barrier in my experience working with babies out of the NICU where their moms, due to birth trauma, weren't able to breastfeed. And so sometimes they'll go the donor milk route. But honestly, I usually feel comfortable and we together kind of come up with a plan to do formula, and it works really well. And it doesn't mean that their baby's any, less or any bit behind another baby that was breastfed. And in many ways, I try to keep it positive always and just focus on the things that are in your control, which again, we'll dive into more with the food that is definitely in your control.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to make sure I was sensitive about that because I'm not a mom, haven't ever had a baby. And I know that there's so many reasons why someone can't breastfeed and are probably super worried about the health of their baby, like, especially because of the things that we're talking about. So I like that you pointed that out. That's great. So antibiotic use is another thing that can really shift the composition of the gut microbiota, basically just decreasing overall diversity. So really important to use antibiotics when necessary, not, using a heavy reliance on them. But just wanted to point it out here that the early use of antibiotics does tend to be associated with poor health outcomes later in life associated with dysbiosis or imbalance of gut bacteria. And the last one on my list here is the introduction of solids. So, I mean, this is how we segue into Caroline's expertise really is, I've looked at the research and seeing that solid foods promote the growth of beneficial bacteria by enriching genes coding to allow the baby to utilize a larger diversity of carbohydrates, synthesize or make vitamins, and break down medication. So
Fabulous.
This
is where the magic happens.
Where the magic happens. So I guess you already mentioned that term seeding the gut. I really, really like this. And so you are the expert on baby-led weaning. I think you gave a great intro on kind of what it is. So I think that maybe segueing into why it's important and kind of how it relates to nutrition adequacy and the gut microbiome.
Sure. Yeah. So I will kind of giving my disclaimer that it's definitely up to the parent to decide how they feed. I will kind of sound a little bit more pro baby-led weaning in this talk, just because I think a lot of the data research and a lot of my just experience as a clinician points toward baby-led weaning when it works as being a superior method. And the reason for that, I believe, is that it just offers more flexibility. So one of the kind of hallmark aspects or pillars of baby-led weaning is that the family only has to make one meal. So one meal can be translated and sort of parlayed into a texture or a way that is safe for baby, right? Because a baby can't eat a lot of things. They're choking hazards. So I work with clients to make sure that they're serving nutrient-dense foods that meet all the nutrients of concern for an infant, but then are also texturally, developmentally safe for baby, and something that challenges them and kind of, kickstart their oral motor skill development, gross motor development, because that's one thing baby-led weaning really challenges, but always want to be safe. So if a mom decides to feed purees, one thing I do encourage parents to do whenever possible is to home make purees, just because, again, there's more flexibility. If you go to any grocery store and you walk down the baby aisle and you see purees, the stage 1, we're talking stage 1 level foods, which is for infants. Typically, when we talk about starting solids, there's a pretty big spectrum, but it's anywhere from usually 4 to 6 months is when a baby will be developmentally ready. I see kids all shapes and sizes from all aspects of the developmental kind of spectrum. So again, I have to just say those those numbers because that's, yeah, but so it's no big deal if your baby starts later, like 7 months, or if they were in the NICU and they're a corrected age, then maybe they'll start a little later anyway, but generally 4 to 6 months. And if you look at the types of foods on the shelves, they're boring as heck. It's like bland turkey, green bean, peaches. It's just one ingredient and you can't have any fun with them. So one of the things about making your own purees is you have opportunities to either add spices, which is something I love with baby-led weaning, is introducing kind of mild spices to baby, like curry, oregano, basil, thyme, turmeric, all of those things that some have been linked to better gut health, right? Turmeric, mint, things like that. And so baby gets that exposure at a very young age. And there's no research saying that you can't introduce these things to baby. Literally, the literature just doesn't support it. Some people will think, like, obviously you're not going to give them an ancho chili or like a jalapeno pepper. So there are limits, but
people need to be told that though.
I know. Yeah. So don't go hog wild crazy, but within limits of like heat and spice. When I use the word spice, I'm really meaning flavor and aroma and things of that nature. So that's one aspect of kind of the baby-led weaning approach that babies get exposure to. Also, as you mentioned earlier, I work in a subset population of babies, children, people with cystic fibrosis, and those babies require, their energy needs are sky high. So they require more calories from a young age. So oftentimes I'm teaching parents to add a little teaspoon of olive oil or coconut oil to foods to mix it up and to add calories in a natural way. So that's one aspect too of homemaking your baby food. There's just room for flexibility.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I think, you know, with first foods, and hopefully we're going to get into that soon. There's a lot of misinformation and a lot of old wives' tales that really fuel medicine. That a lot of pediatricians won't be on board with baby-led weaning based on maybe, I hate to sound ageist, but perhaps the years that they trained. It just wasn't a thing, or they're just not familiar with it. Therefore, they're not comfortable with it because of that concern for choking. But a choking episode is extremely rare. And if a parent were to get CPR certified, take a course in infant CPR, which is often something pediatricians recommend they do anyway, you'd be able to be very confident in identifying differences between gagging, choking, etc. But what I was meaning to say about that is, you know, so many times we say, okay, your baby's 4 months, doesn't matter where they are on the developmental spectrum, they're ready for rice cereal. Rice cereal is always the first kind of traditional first food or first puree that babies are offered. And there's no research supporting that couldn't necessarily be something else that we're going to eventually dive in and talk about would be really a more superior option as compared to rice cereal based on all the literature that show contaminants are in rice cereal.
Yeah, and so correct me if I'm wrong. So is rice cereal typically the choice that they go with for babies because it's easy to digest and it's like the least likely to trigger an allergic response because of, you know, gluten-containing grains or the wheat-containing grains?
That's a great question. So it's kind of threefold. Number one, maybe the most, I guess, simple one would be it's an easy texture, right? So it's a simple kind of easy puree. So babies generally don't have any trouble maneuvering the bolus of food and swallowing it. That would be number one. Number two is it's an iron fortified food. So at the time of starting solids, and the whole reason we enter complementary feeding is to increase the levels of iron in baby's system because it's so important. And around the age of 7 months, the iron requirements and the needs of a baby are much, much higher as compared to previous months. So that is another reason why infant cereal and that is recommended. And then again, yeah, I think that's the old thought with the allergen is that rice is a hypoallergenic food. But, and I told you we wouldn't get into allergens today because that's literally like another 2-hour podcast episode. And I feel like I need to be backed by a physician on some of the information on that. But the research is actually kind of flipping that concept on its head. And now saying that 4 months of age, depending on risk for atopy, you really need to introduce peanuts and some of the allergenic foods really earlier, and that there's actually lesser risk for developing an allergy later in life if you start with earlier introduction. And the LEAP study, LEAP, if people are research nerds, is really the hallmark study that sort of changed the game. It was a total game changer on that. So again, if you want to invite me for a later podcast,
I'm like, we can talk about that already.
Anyway.
Okay. That's awesome. And so maybe we should segue into quality of baby food and just kind of like, I have so many questions. I think my initial reaction to the things you were saying, I'm just thinking about right now in quarantine with my sister's dog being here. And I'm like, can she eat this? Can she eat that? If I were a mom with a baby right now, I feel like I would need you on speed dial. Like,
Thank you.
I would.
Yes.
I would have so many questions.
A lot of my clients have me, like, we DM on Instagram if they're working with me one-on-one, and I've gotten a lot of kind of freaked out questions, not gonna lie, during quarantine. And yes, anxiety has been through the roof. And if you're a mom out there listening, gosh, I've had so many friends give birth during quarantine. Like, that is another just unfathomable experience.
God bless them.
Exactly. Anyway, but quality of baby food. Yeah. You have done, so I want to bring up, we talked about how rice cereal is often the first food recommended, and how as dietitian, pediatric dietitian, I actually never recommend infant rice cereal as a first food. And the reason for that is because rice in the United States, and really in most parts of the world, is high in arsenic. And arsenic is a chemical element found in the natural environment, like soil, rock, water, and air. So it's kind of hard to avoid. But unfortunately, arsenic is a carcinogen that has been linked to higher rates of skin, bladder, and lung cancer, and is also a neurotoxin. And it's been known to decrease babies' IQs. And unfortunately, that's a permanent effect. And so it's non-reversible. And that's if they've been exposed to excess amounts over a chronic period of time. And so that really should be the number one reason why parents don't choose infant rice cereal as their number one. I was talking to you earlier, there's a study that just came out on March 6th, 2020, or a report rather, that said things are getting better. So a number of samples tested in 2018, everything always is a few years lag time, right, with nutrition and public health, said that the amount of products tested, the amount that met the FDA's required target of 100 parts per billion was only 76%. Though this was better compared to the years 2011 to 2013, only 36% of samples tested met the FDA's recommended target for safety. And that's just
terrifying.
Appalling. And not to mention 76% really isn't that great either. I mean, a C grade, we can do better.
I prefer the 100%.
Yes, I agree. So just some tips, so what's the solution? So I would recommend, if you do have a baby starting solids, skip the rice cereal and offer something like a baby oatmeal, baby quinoa, barley, buckwheat, amaranth. All of those are going to have lesser levels, and they're going to be naturally low in arsenic. So a much better, safer choice.
Yeah. And for those who are listening, like maybe you don't have kids, or you're thinking, okay, so I shouldn't maybe feed my baby, predominantly rice products. This goes for just any human. I mean, if
correct,
human, high levels of arsenic have also been shown to cause cancer in humans. So it's important that everybody tune into this point, because it's very important. And looked at a meta-analysis from 2019 showing that they did like an analysis of different rice purchased in the United States, and they found higher levels of arsenic in all of these products. So, So I think that, as Caroline mentioned, there's other sources of products out there. simply washing rice with arsenic-free water. And I read this and I'm like, how do I know if my water is arsenic-free? But the idea is if you're washing your rice, that can help remove. They showed it can remove up to 3 to 43% of the arsenic. So, it could be useless for some, but if it removes up to 43%, that would be awesome. And then you had mentioned, so other products out there that you could feed a baby. So what would those include?
Yeah. So really, again, how I said, starting the whole concept of purees and starting solids, a lot of it's fueled by old wives' tales and not really hard and fast science. There is nothing saying that a baby can't actually start with meat. So I actually recommend starting with pureed meat as one of the first high iron sources. Obviously, if a family wants to raise a child vegan or vegetarian, they will gasp and turn the other way right now. But if they're raising an omnivore, then a meat product would be actually preferred. Now, I do want to segue briefly into differences in quality. And again, would point to more reasons to make your own and to puree your own in a food processor. And that is because many of the baby food meat purees have added cornstarch as a filler. And cornstarch, in many studies, has been shown to negatively affect the microbiome, and something we generally, just don't want a lot of. And it's like, why? Why is cornstarch in it? Well, first of all, it's a binder, and it helps keep everything together in a processed, packaged product. But if you can avoid it, well, I would sure recommend it, because really it kind of waters down and displaces the nutrients anyway. And you don't get as much bang for your buck per serving if you purchase a product that has added cornstarch. So again, another reason why I'm very much a fan of the baby-led approach. And again, if you work with me with your child online, I have your child eating fork tender pot roast at 7 months. And I have videos to prove it. I'm happy for you to come on over to my page and we can explore together. But not only are they, getting that sensory input and sensory experience from touching and feeling and getting messy with the food, but they're also getting a nutritionally dense option, which is what I'm so passionate about.
Wow. I would love to be a baby eating, some nice ground up prime rib right there. I'm on board.
For sure. Yeah.
So this is just a selfish question, just because it's something that I know I've heard. Maybe it's one of those wise tales that you were talking about. Now, what's your take on fruits and sugars and introducing those to children?
Yeah, I love that you bring this question up, because it's so common, and parents think, oh my gosh, I'm going to spoil my baby if I start with fruit. And that is an old wives' tale, 100%. So our biological kind of DNA, all humans have a propensity for sweet things, right? Evolution states that, guilty, I know. Where are the Scotcheroos? I think Scotcheroo is a Midwest thing. Anyway, aside, evolution says that, sweet things are safe, energy-dense foods. Like the hunter-gatherer sees a berry, woohoo, they're going to eat the berry. And bitter foods indicate danger or poison, right? Bitter foods are never good. Breast milk is extremely sweet. So baby, even when breastfed, is going to have this sweet taste already kind of priming their taste buds. So no, it's all about behavior and setting boundaries and behavioral kind of guidelines in the home. And that's kind of up to the parent to do that. But no, it's very untrue that a baby will be spoiled if you offer them a fruit puree or hand them a mango or something like that. Okay. You asked me about juice. You got a question about juice from someone with infants. Juice. So there are a few foods that I always say, rarely am I a stickler and say hard and fast no on things with my practice, except for a few. And so there are certain foods that a baby should not have at all before first year of age. And that would be number 1, honey, for risk of botulism. Number 2, fluid cow's milk. We don't want any liquid cow's milk. We want either formula or breast milk because the nutrient levels are just not adequate. And then we also, what was the last one? We also don't want beverages like juice and things like that. So that needs to come once they've reached the first year of age. I will say there's a caveat, however, that I use juice sort of as a medical tool, and that is in the setting of constipation. And I just did a whole series on my Instagram on GI related stuff with infants, constipation. Yeah, I teamed up with a pediatric gastroenterologist, and we really dove into things, just kind of addressing parents' biggest concerns. So if you think of the letter P, fruits, so plums, prunes, everybody knows prunes will get a good BM. And then apples, I guess, is sort of different, and peaches maybe a little bit less. Those are what we call a high sorbitol containing fruit. And so what happens is there's sort of this osmotic laxative effect where when the fruit is introduced in the GI tract, water gets pulled in from the lumen of the GI system and then flushes out, and then can kind of alleviate constipation. So in small doses though, like we're talking an ounce at a time at most. So that would be one instance I use fruit. But I see in practice, you asked me about long-term effects on the health of too much fruit or too much juice rather. And it's really just, is this a good beverage? I mean, it's kind of public health nutrition, like what we would recommend to the average person. We don't want sugary beverages consumed because there's no fiber. There's not that benefit. So that would be my 2 cents on the whole juice topic.
I love your approach. It always very balanced, but scientifically, supported. And I think my question too is, so we know that a diverse gut microbiome is a healthy one. We want to keep it as diverse as possible and having variety of foods.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about like, what if, so that was my concern with the fruit is if we introduce it too soon, is the child not going to accept other foods? And then we now set ourselves up for lack of diversity and then, poor gut health. So in terms of just diversity and getting a good variety, how do you do you have any, I know we could probably talk a whole episode, but any broad advice? Is it exposure? Is it, what's your take on it?
It's all about exposure. And again, it kind of ties into that behavior. So many times parents will give up too soon because their baby will fight them or they don't show interest because, fruit tastes better than spinach. I mean, of course, but it's all about that consistency and persistence of parent just offering over and over again. And that's really all it is, in my opinion. And babies really will take a good variety. I mean, they don't know anything. It's going to taste better compared to what they've been used to, right? It's a whole new experience. So just, another reason why the baby-led approach can be superior is because it offers possibility for more variety, and variety is the name of the game with nutrition.
Awesome. Now with my adult clients, I am recommending, probiotic rich foods like yogurts, kefir, fermented veggies. What's your take on that in infants, or at what age is that? If I don't know if that's even a question you can answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because yogurt or some of those dairy-rich foods are an allergen, it's not necessarily the very first food I recommend starting with, but very shortly after they've been exposed to other foods, I recommend small amounts of lactose-containing foods. We don't want a lot because babies' GI systems are not primed for that much lactose. Again, the reason why we don't want fluid milk, the lactose load is just too high. But yeah, there is benefit to giving probiotic-rich foods. Now, when it comes to supplements, I'm really not a fan for infants. The research and the guidelines say that probiotic use is not a way to alleviate constipation. It's just, not the research just isn't robust enough. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. So that would be something, I would say just wait until a later time and just focus on food, because again, food is not meant to be baby's main source of nutrition at this time either. It's only complementary. So I want us to kind of put things in perspective a bit too. It does not replace breast milk or formula. That's the number one most important nutrition source before 1 year of age. So this is just a way to kind of get them primed and ready for being an adventurous eater later in life too.
That's awesome. Now, I think this is hopefully will be my last question. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna keep drilling you, but In terms of GI issues, like you work with a lot of parents, and I'm sure GI issues is something that you like are obviously specializing in and seeing with it. Now, are there a few common things or mistakes that you see parents making? I know, so I was lactose intolerant from the get-go. So I was actually formula fed and, very colicky baby, like always had a stomach ache, whatever. So obviously my mom, put me on lactate pills as I was getting older, whatever, and,
Yep.
was no lactose. So what are some common things that you see in children when it comes to GI issues or mistakes that parents are making maybe that, people could take away from today?
Definitely. Well, this is a whole nother podcast episode in
Maybe like
and of
one or
itself.
two or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
So cow's milk protein allergy is a concern amongst infants. It is pretty rare though. And so I think I saw, I mean, I don't want to be quoted on the research because I don't remember the number or the facts, but I saw a study where, the actual true diagnosis of CMPA is much less than what physicians make it out to be, right? So oftentimes we'll over medicalize colic, or we will kind of make a bigger deal about gas or things than it really is. And babies are gassy, right? Because they're swallowing air when they're crying, their GI systems are not yet mature, so they're changing on the daily. And so with that is going to come some GI upset. And I think across the age spectrum, we tend to sometimes over medicalize GI problems, right?
Yeah. Oh my,
Food
as
is
you're
not the
saying
energy.
this,
Yes. I'm
as you're
sure
saying
you
this,
see
I'm
this
like,
all the time,
I have a client who comes and they're like, well, I was bloated after I ate this. I go, well, bloating's
right?
not bad. Bloating's not
Bloating
always
is a
bad.
beautiful thing.
Yeah. You
It
ate.
means you're working. Your body's working for you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping that, most of my clients are meeting their fiber needs. So if you're eating fiber and you're getting, plenty of diverse range of foods, you're going to have bloating, you're going to have gas. Like I
Right.
got to start a hashtag like normalize poop talk or like normalize
bloating.
bloating. Like it's normal to
Yes.
have those. So,
And this is not to downplay those who really do suffer from chronic conditions
yes.
that bloating is a serious side effect from. That's not what I'm talking about. But definitely gassy babies and just, parents being upset or anxiety ridden over constipation in babies, a little bit of that can be normal. But I just encourage parents to have transparent, open conversations with their pediatricians and primary care providers, just because there is a lot of misinformation on the internet, and it's important to seek trusted, reputable sources.
Yeah, I think that would be across all boards when it comes to nutrition and wellness advice is, sound communication, a good support team, knowledgeable. Yeah, that goes a long way.
Definitely.
Wow. So, I mean, I feel like we crammed a lot into this one episode and
we did.
Yeah. So are there any other, I know you mentioned like skin to skin. We obviously just kind of touched on the importance of dietary and then, environment in general. We know that our environment is really supportive of healthy gut bacteria. The research has shown like, you look at Asian populations versus, children who are grown up in the US and you see different gut compositions based on just the environment that you were grown up in, irrespective of the dietary practices, it can really play a huge impact. Is there anything else you would add to that list of impact on the gut microbiome?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's this hypothesis that we're too hypoallergenic in our environment, right? So I just recommend to parents, let your kid be a kid, let them play in the mud, dig in the dirt, get all that good exposure. And that really does impact their gut microbiome for the better. Have a dog, have a cat, have a pet. Research has shown that can improve things too. So little seemingly small changes really do impact over the long term quite profoundly.
I love that. I mean, let me call my mom in here who wouldn't let me get a dog when I was growing up.
I couldn't get a dog either.
Seriously. My gut would have been so much healthier.
I know. Oh gosh.
But we're doing okay. So
yes.
Okay. Well, I love that. I love those mentions. I actually did a post on the research behind having a pet and how that can impact diversity. So again,
so cool.
Clearly something that I'm a little still butthurt about from my childhood. So that was wonderful, Caroline, that information.
Thank you.
I hope that everybody listening has been able to digest a lot of that. What would you say could you give us, the listeners, 3 big takeaways for how to improve the gut microbiome for an infant, or maybe for obviously the parent listening, how they can promote, a sound, solid groundwork for a child to grow up healthy through a healthy gut.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I would say take starting solids seriously and seek help. So if you'd like me to help you, again, I see clients one-on-one to do the baby-led approach. And if you don't want to do the baby-led approach, I'm happy to teach you ways to start purees in a way that still allows for that variety. So seek support and really do take it seriously, because if you haven't already noticed from this recording, is that we can make a profound difference from the very first months of life. So I think it's pretty cool. So that'd be my number one, is always seek a trusted source for your information and seek help. Number two, realize that it's never too late to start this type of thing. So if you didn't know this when having a child and you want to begin now, your child's going to be better off for it. So much of this microbiome research has only been done in the past 10 years, 15 years. So I didn't have it when I was a child growing up. And, so much profound research in the nutrition space has been done just within the recent years. So start today and view tomorrow as a brand new slate to get going with this. And then lastly, just really focusing on fiber-rich sources, because we know that is without a doubt one of the best, most efficient ways to improve the diversity of the gut microbiome. So things like chickpeas, lentils, whole grains like oatmeal, quinoa, leafy dark greens, berries, all of those things are going to be fiber-rich. All of those are safe for your baby to eat. So those are my 3 tips.
Love it. Those were great tips. And for those who are interested in, the research that we did bring up, I'm going to link those in the show notes, especially the one with the link to arsenic and rice. There's also a really great resource that I'll link in there that is a consumer lab or consumer report, of kind of how to choose a good, choose different cereals or products for your baby and just for yourself, looking at the contents. And if you look at where the rice is grown, things like that. So Caroline, if people are interested in working with you, your Instagram page is a wealth of resources. TheClinicDietitian.com, is that the website?
So it's, I'll correct you just slightly. It's TheClinicDietitian.com, spelled with a T, dietitian with a T. And then my handle on Instagram is the same, @TheClinicDietitian. So come over. I've got like a link tree with all of the links that you can work with me. I also have an ebook for sale on my website, all about starting solids via the baby-led weaning approach. It's also got breastfeeding tips. It was co-written with a lactation educator as well as a dietitian. So that would be a great resource if some parent is just wanting to learn more and kind of read up on that. So check it out.
Awesome. Well, I know for sure I feel grateful that I have you on my speed dial, because
when you have a child, let me teach it how to eat.
Seriously, I'm so grateful that I have you as not only a colleague, but a friend. You're a wealth of knowledge in this field, and I cannot thank you enough for coming on this episode. It has been such a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening.
It's my pleasure as well. Anytime.
All right, girl. Well, I will definitely be seeing you. So.
Okay. Awesome.
All right. Bye.
Take care.